Welcome to this episode of the Women in Technology Spotlight. Today I have with me Friederike Heyne. She's a project manager for SAP Women in Tech. Welcome, Friederike.
Hi, welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. Tell me a little bit about yourself, Friederike.
So I live close to Walldorf, which is close to SAP where I work. So I'm from this area. I studied in Heidelberg. I live here with my boyfriend. Unfortunately, I do not have a dog. I'm a huge dog lover, but it hasn't happened yet. Well, and on the weekends, you can mostly find me on the airfield because I have a pilot license for gliders. And I also have my own glider, which I bought during the first year of the pandemic, overhauled it, and now well, you can find me at the airfield most of the time. That's really all I do on the weekends, I'm afraid to say, yeah.
Well, that's such an uncommon hobby, I'd say, having a glider. That sounds so cool, soaring above the earth.
Yeah, I can recommend it.
Does that mean that there's a lot of green space and rural areas around where you live?
Yes.
Is SAP, I have never been to Walldorf, so I'm wondering, because SAP is this global, worldwide enterprise, and so I'm wondering, is it located in a very rural area?
It is. I mean, SAP itself, the entire headquarters in Walldorf, it's huge, but it's surrounded by a nice forest and some fields. And the area I live in is actually also very green. It's more in the countryside, so you can always go to the forest to walk. So there's large areas with green space that which is very nice. Living before that in Heidelberg in the city, which was also beautiful. Don't get me wrong, but countryside has a side to it that's really great.
Yeah. So that immediately brings me to my next question, actually, how you ended up close to Walldorf at SAP. You already said you studied in Heidelberg, but tell me a little bit more about your background, where you're initially from. Is your family also in tech, maybe your parents, or how did you come to be a woman in tech?
Right. So I'm actually from this area I live in, just like 20 minutes away from where my parents live. So I never really left that area, just to study abroad twice. And how I ended up in tech, well, it's a long story. So I studied art history and anthropology in Heidelberg, which is completely different. I also had economics as a side thing, because you couldn't fully study art history back then, and I needed something on the side. But I actually also worked a lot in the art history field and culture before I ended up at SAP. And it's a funny story because I never thought I would end up in tech, because back at school I wasn't good at math. I wasn't good with numbers, with calculating, and I don't even think we had anything that was computer related. And I graduated in 2010. It was a while ago, but still computers were around. It just wasn't a thing to learn about. And then I did the one thing I loved at school, which was art history. And I loved it, every bit of it. It was incredibly fascinating. And I never regretted doing that degree. It's just that when I started my master's, I thought, well, you've tried so many different things in the culture space, so many different jobs, and it never really clicked for some reason. And not for some reason, there's many reasons it never really clicked. We can get into that later. So I thought, well, what else could I do, maybe outside of the cultural world? And I figured, well, there's SAP, which is close to Heidelberg, where my university was. And I thought, let's see what I can do there. And the most straightforward thing to me back then was marketing. So I applied for an internship at SAP. That was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken, so a while ago. And I did an internship there in experience marketing. And I learned that I can actually do a lot of things outside of art history, just because I can learn on the job. I can train, people can show me stuff. And after that, I was a working student, finished my degree then, and was applying for different jobs. I tried culture jobs again, but it was, and I think it still is, very competitive. You have a small amount of jobs available, lots of people who have a degree in humanities, and so I was like, let me see what else is out there. I have this marketing experience. I worked several years as a working student in marketing. And for some reason, and the connection here is still not clear to me until today, I ended up as a product manager for back then the SAP Cloud Platform in Waldorf, which is it's a crazy story. It's a crazy shift. That was partially due to my marketing experience. And I also, I'd been around SAP before. I loved the spirit they had. And back then I thought, well, this is really where the future is being decided on, right? Because technology is such a huge part of our lives. And I thought, when I was in marketing, I didn't have that much to do with the actual product. And I was like, let me see what's out there in development. Maybe I can do something even without knowing how to code. And ended up in product management. Mm-hmm. And that was a crazy learning curve, from like zero to knowing so much about the product and so much about the processes behind it. And it opened an entirely new world to me. I was blown away. It was hard. Mm-hmm. It was really hard, but I loved it. And then at some point I found out about women in tech, which is what I'm doing now. And that's, mm-hmm. Should we go that way? Are we that far yet?
Let me just say a couple of things. I mean, your journey is so interesting, and it's, I feel, a very typical journey for a lot of women who end up in tech, because I've talked to a couple of women now on my series, and a lot of them end up being career changers because when they were younger, they had no connection to this whole tech world. And I feel it was the same for you. You say typical things. I wasn't good at math. I wasn't interested in tech. So and I feel that's what happens to a lot of women. Just when they're younger, they just don't see or don't have these role models, these connections, so that would guide them towards that. And then when they come into contact with the whole thing, usually by chance, then they find out that it's actually really interesting. And you also touched on something else that I find quite important. When you were looking for a job in your actual field, you realized there was a lot of competition, but there's also another thing. I think those jobs aren't quite as well paid as the job are in the tech field, right?
if we could speak openly about this,
yes,
most of the work I did in culture was unpaid or rarely paid. I did an internship at an auction house back then. It was mandatory to pay interns, so I didn't receive any money, and they had sometimes working, I know that they had working hours outside of Monday to Friday, also outside of the hours, to have auctions in the evenings and stuff. And well, I guess, to be honest, salary also was a box I wanted to tick, because I didn't feel like my work was valued or appreciated there in a sense. So I guess it's true. Sometimes you feel a little bit ashamed to say that. Be in it for the purpose, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's such a that's such a woman thing to think, that you should be in it for the purpose. And this is what's holding a lot of women back in pursuing a career that would give them a good financial basis for their living. Because we have to be very honest. I mean, money is important. And when you look at the jobs a lot of women do, they're all badly paid. They have bad hours and they're badly paid. So that's also one of my motivations to get more women into tech, to show them that there are fields out there that are well paid, where you have a lot of flexibility and where you can actually feel at home, as we do.
I always say 50% of my job to me is the content, and the other 50% is the team, the salary, the work atmosphere I work in, like the benefits I have, the way I can continue living my life while at the same time working. And I don't think it was that well balanced in the jobs I had previously done, or the internships I had previously done. So that was definitely also one of the reasons.
Thank you for confirming that, because I feel women need to look out a little better for themselves around these topics.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something else just now that I also think is very important when you look for the job you're going to have. Its benefits, and it's also the team you're working with. And of course, there is a part is purpose. And you are now project manager for SAP Women in Tech, right? And I think that is partly because you have a purpose there, right?
True. Yes. So I switched to this team full-time in April last year, so 2021. And I just love the stuff we do. I just love the purpose behind it. And I love that I can be part of this change that we're trying to create within the company, but also on a larger scale, because I think whenever I get in touch with different companies and we exchange with people who do similar topics in different companies, they are very surprised about the amount of workforce we have behind these topics, because within SAP, it's not just women in tech, there's also diversity and inclusion, there's also a business women network, and there's many, many things. I'm just mentioning a few that try to help bring a change around. And I think we're really at the forefront here, which is one of the things I love so much about the job I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And I must say, I was actually really surprised when I realized that you had a full-time job around this topic. I did, we were in contact and I knew there was SAP Women in Tech, but I thought that, like for most companies I was accustomed to, it was kind of like something you did on the side beside your actual job. So kudos to SAP for having that.
Absolutely. So the topic SAP Women in Tech started in 2017. It was an internal summit where suddenly people realized there's only men on stage explaining technical topics. And then people were like, well, we have so many incredible women. Why are they not on stage? And this is where the entire thing started rolling. And it's only since last year that we have a full-time team within the company. Previous to that, I was doing stuff on the side while I was still in product management for the cloud platform. And I think we're so lucky to have this opportunity. And SAP is actually a great company that they put a focus on this so much and let us do the work. I think we're a team of 5 at the moment. So 5 people working on this topic. I mean, one of us is also doing diversity and inclusion, which is kind of a little bit of a different topic. But I think we're really taking the right steps here to go into the right direction, because there's 2 things that we want to achieve with women in tech. The first thing we really want to do is make the female experts visible with their expertise. And we consider every woman working in tech to be a woman in tech. So you don't have to write code, which is something I cannot do. I started a really basic beginner's course to learn Python, and it was a lot of fun, but I still don't know much about it. So even if you work in accounting, or if you're a lawyer working in the tech industry, in marketing, if you're a consultant, everything, you are working in tech, you are a woman in tech. So we want to make these women and their expertise visible within the company, but also externally. And we've actually kind of crafted a vision for women in tech, which is that in 2030, women will look back at today and they'll be surprised that it wasn't completely natural to work in the tech industry, to work at SAP as a woman, no matter what kind of degree or training you have, right? So that is where we want to end up, basically saying that 10 years from now, we think SAP Women in Tech is no longer necessary because we kind of fix the problem, right?
I really hope that's true. I'm not terribly optimistic, but I hope it's true.
Well, you have to set your goals high, right?
Yeah, you should, definitely. And I do agree with your definition of women in tech. And if you look at my podcast, you will see that most women I interview are not women who code. So I definitely see every woman working in the tech industry as a woman in tech. And I think it's important because we're constantly talking about the issue we have, filling roles, finding new talent, and finding enough people in the workforce in the tech industry. And the reason is that we don't explain what we do, right? And Which brings me back a bit to your journey, because obviously you have this purpose and you have this goal and you're working towards that. But what triggered that? What was it like going into SAP especially from a cultural field, which is typically much more feminine?
Yes. So I think in development, I was mostly surrounded by white men in their middle ages, let's say around 45 to 55. That is the standard colleague I had, but there were some women, don't get me wrong, especially in product management, and there are women all along in different areas. It's just that I think SAP, and I don't want to say the wrong numbers here, has something around 30% or 34% female employees around the world. So it's not that bad. It could be worse, right? So I had a really steep learning curve. I knew next to nothing. And I had no background in anything. And I think this is what I felt, that imposter syndrome that people talk about so much really hitting me, because I was like, I don't know anything. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to survive the next meeting because I have no knowledge foundation I can rely on. But I have to say that I didn't really struggle with the men so much, because I found amongst them some really great, I'm going to call it mentors, even though we never established like a formal mentorship, right? But I remember the first year working for SAP in product management, I had my colleague with me. He was in his late 50s. He was about to retire. But he was such a great source of information and of backup and telling me to do stuff and to actually push me forward. And I know this is contrary to what most people describe, that, you know, men are not a great support. But well, in my situation, I guess maybe I was lucky. I've had a lot of great male mentors. I mean, there were things that didn't go well, you know, when you're in a meeting and your manager, basically after you finish saying what you wanted to say, says the exact same thing that you just said, but, you know, just saying it again because apparently you haven't said it the right way.
No, so, you said it in the wrong voice.
Well, probably, right? This has happened. And I should have spoken to that person who did it back then, but I was too scared. We're like, okay. So these things happen, obviously, but I've also found great support in some of my male colleagues back then. Which I'm still in touch with them until today, to, you know, just feed off their experience and to see their perspective on things. And I also think this is something that we need to increase with what we're doing with women in tech. When you read women in tech, you think, oh, it's just for women. But that's not even close to the truth, right? So we're now trying to shift a bit towards including the male colleagues, actually making them aware of what's happening. And I was so surprised because we've recently spoken to a group of men and they had experienced so many issues in terms of not only how to address the topic, how to address telling a female colleague, I think you can do this and I think you should do this, right? So there's a huge conversation about how to actually talk about this without sounding insulting or trying to, you know, push someone in a direction they don't want to go in. So this is part of the issue, but there's also a heightened sense of heightened sense of seeing that these things are happening, but not really knowing what to do. And maybe I'm in a privileged position to be able to talk to these men who have, you know, a sense for that, have a sense for what's going on. But I think we're really going into the right direction here. And I've always found my colleagues to be open to these topics and to discuss what's going on. So maybe I was just lucky. Like, I cannot speak for everyone, but I've had some good experiences there too. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I don't think you were lucky because that reflects my experience as well. Of course, you will always, you know, meet some men who will be difficult and some men who will try to talk over you. And there will be men who repeat the same thing you said and pretend they didn't hear you or whatever. But the general experience working in tech is actually, and it was for most of the women I talked to, positive. And I think we should emphasize that because there is this trope out there that if you come into the tech industry as a woman, you will be alone and you will be, you know, shunned by men and they won't talk to you. And I think we should really talk about the fact that we have good experiences here.
Yeah, I did. And I have to say sometimes I think that the biggest obstacle for me, or the biggest challenge, is still myself. I am my biggest enemy, because even when some of my colleagues would say, find your own project, like come up with an idea and just pitch it, I would be like, I don't have the knowledge. I have no background in IT. How would I know? Not even considering that maybe my perspective that I bring from outside into the company, from my art history and anthropology background, might be helpful in some cases. So I guess that's really the worst part of it, fighting yourself, convincing yourself that you actually have knowledge, you have a valuable opinion that you should bring to the table, you have a perspective, you have a right to talk, to speak up. Maybe it was an age thing, because I started when I was about 27 or 28, and I'm starting to feel a bit more confident about these things. But really, that was the hardest struggle, and still is in some cases. It doesn't just dissolve.
Yeah. I think it's not just you. I think a lot of women struggle with this. You mentioned imposter syndrome. We all know, we all have it. And I think, especially with the fact that a lot of us are career changers, I am too, and a lot of women I talk to are, we often feel that we lack some sort of, inherent knowledge that the men in the field have, that we should be having. And we always kind of feel that we are lacking something, even though, and that's a big thing, most of us actually acquired most of the knowledge ourselves, and we are doing these jobs, and which is actually also goes to show that you can learn anything, and
True.
And there's a reason we were hired for these jobs. But I do agree that these thoughts are there, and we tend to hold ourselves back because we shouldn't speak up. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we don't understand something, and all these little things. Yeah, it's very important. And I also like that you mentioned that women in tech is not just about women, that you have to actually bring in men and talk to them. And I had an interview with Lindsey Graham a while ago, and she said this one sentence, it always sticks with me. She said, we have to harness the power of the majority. Yeah, and that's so true. We have most of the people working in tech are still men. And if we want to change the situation, we have to include them in this whole transition. And also let them talk on the topic, talk with them. It's not just about women sitting together and talking, with each other. It's kind of pointless in the long run.
It's less about us against them. It's more about helping people understand. And I find that these discussions about women in the workplace, about many different, let's say, difficult topics, because there's a lot of anxiety, but also anger out there. As soon as it gets to that point where people get very emotional and also angered by what you're saying, because you could approach a discussion like this coming from, you need to do something, you need to speak up, why, you're trying to force people into doing something, you put your anger into this. And I don't think that takes us anywhere, because if I go into a situation like this and someone will confront me in a way that seems angry, I'll be like, no, I'm not having that discussion. And I'm rather motivated to speak against you than actually help you, right? Yeah. So I think it's really about finding the right tone to go into these conversations and really trying to be open and listening to what people have to say. Because I think it's not just, there's this discussion when, you hire a lot of female workforce, that you hire them not based on talent, but based on their gender, right? This is a topic. So, and I think we go against it. We say, well, what are you talking about? This is wrong. Of course they have talent. Of course they're qualified to do this. But I think sometimes we should maybe rather listen first to, why is that person saying that, they're just hiring people based on, their gender? Like, what is maybe their internalized fear? Do they think they'll lose their job? Are they maybe unsatisfied with the current, there's a long list. I don't want to go into detail, but it's, to me, a large part of the conversation is about listening to the things that are not being said out loud. And you need to try to find these things. You need to try to listen to the people and see where they're coming from. And it takes a while. It takes some time to do that, right? And I think that's why it's so slowly progressing at times. That's the experience I've had. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think that's something that a lot of people underestimate, that when there's a lot of push in one direction, there will be pushback, and there will be fears, and there will be, and also, when people lose certain privileges, they tend to feel that all of a sudden their life is not as good as it was before. But I think on top of what you already said, there's this other fact that when you bring more diversity into the workplace changes, obviously. And, you had like one stereotype of people who worked in tech. And even those men who came into tech, they weren't actually all the same. But for some reason, they all had to become the same. Yeah. So now we're breaking that up, because we're bringing in women, we're bringing in other diverse talent. But what that means, and I think that's something we need to talk about with everyone as well, is that everyone has more option to be who they are. Even the men now have an option to be different from other men. Not everyone is actually a nerd who is interested in, Star Trek and plays video games. So all of a sudden, even men have the option to be more diverse. And I think it helps all of us. It helps them to show sides of themselves in the workplace that they would not have if there hadn't been women. So there's all these benefits that I think people have to start realizing, that it's not just things we're doing for women. It's actually, we're doing it for everyone. We're making life better for everyone in the tech industry.
Yeah. We can all benefit from diverse teams. I mean, there's even studies showing that, right? So yeah. And I really, really appreciated having both men and women in the team, and from many different backgrounds, and just learning about how they see things, their perspective on things. So I think this is crucial, and we need to make everyone, or help everyone, understand that they can benefit from this. Yeah. Absolutely.
So Friederike, if you look back on the young woman you were when you came into the tech industry, and or at the woman still trying to decide what to do with her life, what would you recommend to young women, setting out on their journey?
I'm trying to think of something that hasn't already been said like 1,000 times, even though most things are universally true for everyone. That's why they're being repeated so often. I think especially for me, I would like myself to know that be authentic, because a lot of the time I felt that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't qualified, that I wasn't acting or behaving the right way in certain situations, in certain work situations, right? And when you always try to be something you're not because you think the situation or the work requires it from you, you will always end up torn between the person you are and that ideal thing you want to be. And that just made me sick to my stomach. It's a lot of thinking badly about yourself, thinking you need to change. That never helped me ever. So find a workplace, find a job where you feel like you can be yourself authentically. Well, that's always worked for me, even though sometimes I never really run by those rules. I thought I had to be different. So be authentic, absolutely. Then that old saying that everything will turn out for the better, right? Everything will fall into place. That's something everyone kept telling me. And I was always like, but what do I do? Like, where's the advice I need to fix this specific situation, right? So I guess some patience is always advisable on top of that. But yeah, also not being too afraid to ask for help, and not being too afraid to make mistakes, because I think I never really had a good culture with making mistakes, right? It was, for me, it was always, do not make a mistake, because once you've made the mistake, you can never reverse it, and then it's over. That was my mindset, right? Going into school, going to university, going to the workplace, that it was always like that. It was like, you cannot fail. That is the worst thing to do. Instead of thinking, well, let me try this, and if it doesn't work out, I'll find something else. But I needed to turn 30 or 31 to realize that. And still sometimes I think I cannot fail. It's not an option, right? But yeah, embrace embrace your failures, make mistakes, because you can learn from them. You actually can. But that's also, that goes on the list of what people usually tell you, right?
Well, yes, this is, of course, allowing yourself to fail is one of the things people tell you, but everyone has their unique perspective and their unique experience with that. And I like how you describe that because I understand that, because I come from a similar culture, it's German speaking culture, no failure, no mistakes,
Don't show emotions.
And for me, that resonates very well, because especially also with the authenticity thing, be authentic and don't try to be someone else to fit in. That's so hard when you start out and you feel like you are in a completely different environment and you're different from everyone else. So I think it's really good advice, and I love your perspective on that. And I want to thank you for sharing this. It was a pleasure talking to you, Friederike. And yes, thank you for giving me your time.
Absolutely. I would definitely do it again if you will ever have me back on your podcast.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.